Good evening, everyone. My name is Lara Rita. I am Senior Director for Community Planning and Civic Engagement at the Department of City Planning. I'm thrilled to be here tonight with you to talk about the City of Yes carbon neutrality. I would first like to ask if anyone needs translation at this meeting. I will read from a slide and I ask other language interpreters to do the same. Please click on the interpretation icon for Spanish, Mandarin, or Cantonese to hear a simultaneous interpretation of the session. During the Q&A, staff will be available to provide language assistance for Spanish, Mandarin, and Cantonese speakers as needed. Spanish, Mandarin, or Cantonese speaker participants may also contact us for additional assistance via our email at dcpcityofyes, all one word, _DL@planning.nyc.gov. Spanish interpreter, if you could unmic and do the same.
Andrea? Spanish interpreter 1, Andrea? Andrea? One moment, please. Production, would you please check to see if Andrea is in the main room?
Test.
It doesn't look like Andrea is with us.
All right. Production, would you please bring Spanish interpreter 2 into the main room? One moment, please. We're just having a minor technical issue.
Do you want me to start with the Mandarin?
Let me just finish this real quick.
Sure.
Spanish interpreter 2, Aziel?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Could you read the second paragraph, please?
Absolutely. Por favor, haga clic en el símbolo de interpretación en español, mandarín o cantonés para escuchar la interpretación simultánea de la sesión. Durante la sesión de preguntas y respuestas, estará disponible asistencia para interpretación en español, mandarín y cantonés para quien lo necesite. También nos puede contactar para asistencia adicional por el correo electrónico dcp_dl@planning.nyc.gov.
Thank you so much. Mandarin? Translator?
大家好，那我们今天的话呢，会有一个同声传译的服务，所以呢，如果您需要同声传译的话呢，您请点一下底下的一个地球仪，然后呢选择国语或者选择中文哈，谢谢。
And the Cantonese interpreter?
大家好，我哋今晚係會設有廣東話嘅傳譯嘅。如果你大家有需要聽廣東話嘅咧，請向你嘅畫面嘅底部去按一按嗰個地球儀嗰個圖案，咁就會擺入嚟去廣東話個頻道噶啦。咁亦都係，如果係你想聯絡我哋工作人員咧，你可以藉住透住嗰個電郵係 DCP City of Yes 或者話 DL@planning.nyc.gov 嗰度去聯絡我哋工作人員。多謝 ，Thank you。
Thank you all. Next slide. Before we dive into the presentation, we just want to do a little bit of housekeeping to let you know how you can speak and how you can ask your questions this evening. We will first start off with a presentation that lays out the details of a proposal that truly incorporates what you have heard, what we've heard from you, and how we can make New York City a greener and healthier city through these text communities. Then we will dedicate the rest of the time to answering your questions. For those of you who have attended a DCP info session before, tonight's event will run similarly. During the presentation, if a question comes to mind, you can submit it by using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Once we start, staff will collect the questions and queue them up for live Q&A session after the presentation. Once we start the live Q&A portion of the event, you will then have two options to ask your question. You can continue submitting written questions, or you can raise your hand. If you are phoning in, press *9 to raise your hand. When your name is called, you'll be able to use the button at the bottom left corner of your Zoom screen to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you would like. If you're joining us by phone, I will give further instructions at the end of the presentation on how to unmute. We'll alternate between written questions and those who want to speak or question verbally. Next slide. Just a reminder of how you might be able to join DCP meetings in the future. The web address is nyc.gov/engage. And under upcoming meetings is where you can find this meeting invite and all of the information for the Zoom participation. After this session, the project team can be reached by email at carbonneutrality@planning.nyc.gov. Next slide. Now I'd like to hand it over to Edith Sue Chen, who's the Executive Director of DCP, and is here with us tonight to offer a few words about the City of Yes. Edith?
Thank you, Lara. Good evening, everyone. Hi, my name is Edith Sue Chen, and I am the Executive Director at the Department of City Planning. So welcome to tonight's public information session on our City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality zoning text amendment proposal. This planning initiative, which is a priority of Mayor Adams' administration, comprises proposed changes to modernize our zoning codes in several ways to fight climate change. Our proposal will make it easier and ultimately more cost-effective to install modern heating and cooling technologies. This includes allowing solar panels to cover our rooftops, new cladding on older buildings to keep the heat in the winter and the cool air in the summer months. It is also focused on electric vehicles charging stations. Today, it can be exceedingly difficult to find electric charging stations. That disincentivizes New Yorkers from making the switch to zero-emission vehicles. Our rule changes would make EV charging stations much easier to install in many more parts of the city, including, for example, at supermarket parking lots and in underground garages. So as Lara mentioned, our planners will walk you through the changes we are proposing, and afterwards we will open the meeting up to hear your comments and answer your questions. Lara and others on the team will offer instructions for asking questions, writing in the chat, and more. So before we get going, I want to remind that this proposal is one of 3 zoning text amendments that City Planning is working on as part of the mayor's City of Yes campaign. Like carbon neutrality, the other 2 initiatives in this campaign seek to modernize outdated zoning codes that are holding us back as we recover from the pandemic and as our economy and the way we live continue to evolve and grow. The second initiative, the City of Yes for Economic Opportunity, seeks to remove rules that often make it difficult for businesses, especially small businesses, to open or flourish, including even on our commercial corridors. And the third initiative, the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity, seeks to permit more and different types of housing to be built in all our communities, thus making the city more affordable for families and individual New Yorkers. We've been speaking with communities across the city about the City of Yes initiative since last June, and we will continue to do so. We're here with you tonight about the City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality, as it's the first of the 3 zoning text amendments that will go into the city's formal public review process. And that is set to happen in about a month on April 24th, which is the Monday after Earth Day. The zoning rule changes we are seeking are detailed and important for ensuring our city continues to prosper well into the 21st century and beyond. The proposed changes can be intricate, but also very interesting. So we hope that each of you will continue to be involved to help us keep and make New York more green, equitable, prosperous, and more sustainable. So thank you for being here tonight. We are heartened to see you all here. And with that, back to you, Lara.
Thank you so much, Edith. We appreciate you coming and joining with us tonight. Tonight, Borough President Mark Levine was unable to join, but wanted to share a few words on tonight's session. We'd like to be able to play that now.
Production, I think we're having a sound issue. You may need to restart and share with some.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Levine, Manhattan Borough President. Thanks to City Planning for allowing me to say a couple of words on the City of Yes carbon neutrality package, which we're talking about. Believe it or not, the last time our city zoning code was updated was 1961. That's the last time we had a full reboot. And at that point, really, we couldn't imagine some of the technological advances which are now critical in our battle to save our planet, to achieve carbon neutrality in New York. For example, solar panels now are so critical. There's limitations in the zoning code about where and how you can place them on rooftops and parking lots, and we want to fix that. The proposal we're looking at will do that. To have a modern green energy grid, you need battery storage, and the real limitations on where you can locate those facilities. So we want to modernize our zoning code for that. Electric vehicles are so critical to our future, and there's real limitations on where you can have charging stations, especially in indoor locations like garages. And again, the proposals that we're considering would fix that. The way we deal with storm runoff, for example, we're considering proposals that would allow for more flexibility in tree pits and rain gardens. We're even looking at more flexibility in the use of permeable surfaces, again, to absorb storm runoff. These are all sensible proposals that are overdue. They acknowledge advances in technology that are critical in our battle against climate change. So I support this package. I hope you will as well. And I'm glad that in this session, you'll get an update on the details of these proposals. You'll have a chance to ask questions as well. Thank you to City Planning for doing this and for allowing me to speak tonight. Thanks so much, everybody.
Okay, great. So now we're going to go into the actual presentation. And remember, you can add questions or comments into the chat, and we'll make sure to answer them during the question and answer time after the presentation. And as well, we'll be have an open mic conversation as well. I'm now going to pass it over to Nihilus Klingel to continue the presentation.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nihilus Klingel. I'm a planner in the zoning division here at New York City Planning. I personally have been working on a lot of these issues for quite some time, and I'm really excited to be able to share what we've been working on at the department when it comes to researching how zoning can support decarbonization across the city. Next slide. So as Edith mentioned, we are preparing for a public review process in the near future. We're anticipating referring out or beginning the public review process formally for this package of changes on April 24th, the CPC review session after Earth Day. Following April 24th, there will be a 60-day review period that will stretch into July, during which this proposal will be shared with all 59 community boards across the city, all 5 borough boards, all of the borough president's offices, and the general public as well. At the end of this public review process, the package will come back to the City Planning Commission in July, where we will hold a public hearing, where we look forward to hearing all of your thoughts about the proposal. And then in August, we look forward to the City Planning Commission voting on adopting the proposal. Following that, the package will go to the City Council for ultimate adoption and consideration by the City Council. One thing I want to highlight here with the schedule is that one piece of feedback we here at the department have heard frequently is that we don't share enough information in advance of referral or in advance of certification, in advance of ULURP. So I'm really happy that when we've been working on City of Yes, we've been able to meet that request with a number of information sessions and materials we've been sharing online. We've had a public information session back in October where we spoke about carbon neutrality as well as economic opportunity and housing opportunity. And now tonight and on Tuesday of next week, we'll be holding a second set of information sessions focused on carbon neutrality to go into depth on the research we've done to date and the proposal we're anticipating presenting to the City Planning Commission in April and to the public thereafter. Next slide. So one thing I do want to recap from our public information session last October is just the general framing of why we're here talking about carbon neutrality. I want to underscore that we are in a climate emergency, and this climate emergency is caused primarily by greenhouse gas emissions. Amongst those greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide is the main culprit of human-caused climate change. Carbon dioxide is primarily emitted through human activities, and it accounted in 2019 for 80% of our nation's greenhouse gas emissions. Carbon dioxide emissions are largely produced through the burning of fossil fuels. And the Paris Agreement aims to limit global warming and thereby avoid greater climate catastrophe by limiting carbon dioxide emissions and thereby eliminating or reducing global warming to no greater than 2 degrees centigrade through the reductions in carbon emissions. That is a project that will require the participation of the entire human civilization across the planet, and that includes us here in New York City. And so we're looking forward to talking about how we can use here at the City Planning our tools to promote this goal. Next slide.
Nihilus, would you please pause for one moment?
Sure.
Sorry for the interruption. Please continue.
Not a problem. Thanks for your help. So I just also want to recap from last info session. What do we mean at city planning when we're talking about a carbon neutral city of yes for carbon neutrality? What does that actually mean? A carbon neutral city is a city where we've first and foremost reduced our overall energy needs. We can't become a carbon neutral city if we maintain the energy consumption levels that we've had for the last several years. To do this, one of the key things we need to do is to retrofit our city's buildings to become more efficient. I'll be talking a lot about that this evening. The second thing we need to do is we need to clean the grid. We need to ensure that the source of electricity we use is decarbonized and renewable. And thirdly, once we've cleaned the grid and reduced how much energy we need to make sure that all of our remaining energy needs are powered by that clean electric grid by electrifying our buildings and our vehicles. You can see here on the right, this chart from the city's roadmap to 80 by 50, our goal to reduce carbon emissions as a city. A reduction in our carbon footprint really focuses primarily on our building stock. Zoning, because it governs buildings, plays a key role in this carbon dioxide reduction. Next slide. Here at City Planning, we're building on a very strong foundation. So I just want to recap some of the history here that we covered last info session. It starts in 2012 with the Zone Green text amendment, which was a series of elective progressive experiments to promote green building features, such as rooftop solar and wind. It was the first time, for example, that we updated zoning to relate to things like electric vehicle charging. It was a really excellent project, and I think that it's time for us to build on it in light of a lot of the things that have happened since 2012. Those include the realization that we need to reduce our carbon emissions coming from the Paris Agreement, the city's focus on decarbonization coming from the roadmap to 80 by 50, a lot of the lessons learned from using Zone Green over the last 10 plus years, exemplified here with this image of the Zone Greener report from the Urban Green Council, and also recognizing that the legislative landscape has really changed when it comes to decarbonization at the city level with the Climate Mobilization Act, in particular, Local Law 97. We'll speak about that a little bit. And at the state level with the Community Leadership and Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, CLCPA. Finally, we have to keep in mind that if we do not take on ambitious changes as a city and as a nation, there is the risk that we will miss our climate goals. And I'm including here the 2022 report from the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, calling on nations across the world to remember that we are at risk of missing our climate goals if we don't take ambitious measures now. Building on all of that, we are building a project, City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality, that responds to the climate crisis by removing zoning impediments to urgent retrofitting work, to solar, to energy storage, and to electric vehicles. Next slide. So where do we need to go in terms of zoning? How can zoning help? Meeting the challenge of our climate crisis is a massive undertaking. And so we've worked with our sister agencies, as well as dozens of nonprofit and private sector groups to understand what they're working on to reach our climate goals and how zoning can help support them in their efforts. Next slide. And what we've learned during these conversations is that zoning does have a lot to offer in terms of supporting these efforts. This breaks down into 4 general goals, building on the city's roadmap to 80 by 50. The first goal, related to energy, is supporting the decarbonization of our energy grid. The second, just related to buildings, is focusing on decarbonizing our building stock. The third, decarbonizing our vehicles. And the fourth, decarbonizing our waste stream. Next slide. Specifically, within each of these 4 goals, we've identified to date 17 specific things that we propose to change in our city's citywide zoning rules to support these goals. Tonight, I'll be going through each of these 17 proposals in detail. We'll be no need to write all of this down or try to screenshot this. We will be sharing all of these materials online following the meeting tonight. It will be available at the City of Yes website, nyc.gov/cityofyes. Next slide. So first, I'm going to talk about our goals when it comes to energy and the general context in which our zoning work is built. Next slide. Decarbonizing our energy grid is a big subject, and it involves a lot of different constituencies and agencies. By 2040, the New York State energy grid must be 100% renewably based. And this is coming from the New York State CLCPA. We're mobilizing large amounts of offshore wind and hydroelectric power. But like I mentioned at the beginning, one of the key things we need to do as a city is reduce our overall energy demand, not swap it out one for one with fossil fuels. Because our energy demands are so great, we're going to need to generate energy everywhere, not just offshore with large wind facilities. That's why the city has already set a goal of installing over 1,000 megawatts of rooftop solar by 2030. I'll be speaking about that goal a little bit more in a second. It's also important to recognize that the grid that supplies our electricity is changing in fundamental ways. The grid of the future will be less centralized and will have distributed resources spread across the city. Part of this will be to mobilize and capitalize on all of the distributed energy resources like solar across all of our city's rooftops, ensuring that they help meet the overall city energy needs. And to support this change in the grid, to store clean energy and to respond to demand, gigawatts of local energy storage will be crucial. Energy storage, essentially large batteries, will be key, sort of playing a role of the glue that holds our grid together. Next slide. In the grid of the future, fossil-powered generation, and in particular, the dirtiest peaker plants that are kicked on during peak demand events will give way to renewable sources. And in that switch, instead of being able to fire up another turbine at a fossil-powered facility at peak demand, we're going to need to collect energy when it's created and store it for use later on when it's needed. And that's going to require our grid to shift dramatically so that it becomes more fluid with distributed assets spread throughout the city, energy storage, solar, and generation. Next slide. So now I'm going to walk through some of the specific elements of our zoning proposal that relate to that energy goal that we are working within. The first relates to solar on building rooftops. And first, I'm going to talk about flat roofs. Currently, zoning rules allow, and this is dating back to Zone Green 10 years ago, allows solar panels to be added to flat roofs above the zoning height limit, up to 6 feet in certain districts, the lower density districts, and up to 15 feet in higher density districts. When solar panels are elevated to these heights, a couple of new rules kick in. First, a 25% maximum coverage of the roof kicks in, and a 6-foot setback from the facade also apply. The goal here 10 years ago was to minimize the visual impact of solar panels from the street so that we wouldn't be able to really see them. The intention was to promote solar panels installed on the level of the roof. We've learned a lot about how this is actually working in practice. One of the issues is that these zoning rules curtail how much solar a home or building owner realistically can install. And so our zoning has artificially been limiting solar potential and making certain installations infeasible. This, in particular, the 6-foot height that applies to elevated solar in the lower density districts directly conflicts with the fire department's need for 9 feet of clear headroom beneath these solar panels. With all of this in mind, and then the realization that zoning rules are essentially holding back our city's rooftop, rooftops, and that at scale across thousands of buildings, this will result in a large reduction in our total possible solar generation capacity. We are going to be proposing to remove the coverage and setback requirements for rooftop solar and to apply the 15-foot maximum height limit to all flat roof solar installations, regardless of district, to ensure that firefighters have the minimum headroom they need to conduct their work on rooftops. Next slide. Similar issues present themselves in the context of sloped roofs. Currently, zoning allows solar panels to be added to sloped roofs above the zoning height limit, but only up to a height of 18 inches measured perpendicular to the slope of the roof. This assumes, of course, that the solar panels are mounted flush to the level of the roof. The issue here is that many buildings across the city don't necessarily have great solar orientations. And without the ability to tilt the solar panel to catch a better solar angle, many installations become infeasible or underproductive. To ensure that, regardless of your solar orientation, you have the best ability to collect solar generation, to collect solar energy on your home, we are going to be proposing to provide greater flexibility for rooftop solar on pitched roofs by expanding this 18-inch allowance to 60 inches to allow a wider range of solar installation types and solutions, as well as a wider range of solar supporting equipment in rooftop installations. Next slide. The second proposal relates to solar canopies, not on building rooftops, but over parking areas. This is something that we've seen a lot outside of New York City and less so inside of New York City, partly because of zoning. So currently, zoning allows accessory off-street parking spaces, open or enclosed, to obstruct a number of required open spaces, required front yards, required rear yards, etc. Essentially, there's a long list of places where parking is allowed on a zoning lot. The issue is that solar awnings and canopies are not always permitted in the same places, preventing their installation in instances where required parking spaces are provided in a location that doesn't also permit solar awnings and canopies. Our proposal, simply speaking, is to streamline this by allowing solar awnings and canopies, such as the ones pictured at right, to cover parking areas by rectifying the lists of permitted obstructions to ensure that solar is allowed wherever parking is. Next slide. Before going on to explain what we're planning for Proposal 3, I want to provide a little bit of insight on what I'm going to be referring to when I say primary uses and accessory uses. So in the zoning resolution today, there are two different types of uses. There are primary uses, and those are the types of zoning uses that we think of, like a residential use in a residential district. The entire concept of a residential district is to allow a residential use. However, zoning also allows accessory uses that are supporting the primary use, but they themselves may be uses that otherwise would not be permitted in the district. What I'm illustrating here is an example of vehicle parking. Vehicle parking on its own as a primary use wouldn't necessarily be allowed in a residence district, as you can see on the right. But when it's incidental and supporting a primary use, it is allowed as an accessory use. Hopefully that helps explain the differentiation between a primary use and an accessory use. Moving on to the next slide. I want to talk about the proposal we will be making regarding primary use when it comes to solar and other renewable energy generation. Community solar may be familiar to you as one of the ways that energy customers can specify to have renewable energy generated and sold to them through the distribution network. Community solar, such as the example that you see here in this illustration proposed in Sunset Park in Brooklyn at the Brooklyn Army Terminal, is not an accessory use. It is a primary use supporting off-site users. So the zoning resolution currently classifies non-accessory solar generation as a commercial use. And in the case illustrated here, which is a manufacturing district, commercial uses are allowed. The issue is that large parts of the city are off limits to this crucially needed grid supporting solar installation type. To locate in these parts of the cities, solar needs to be kept small so that it can be considered accessory to the primary use, generally precluding grid supporting installations at places that include large residential campuses, houses of worship, colleges, universities, and hospitals. Our proposal is to resolve this on the next slide by reclassifying this use as renewable energy generation use that is permitted in residence districts as of right, provided it does not exceed a site area of 10,000 square feet. You can see here in this map on the right, a breakdown between the commercial and manufacturing districts across the city in green and the residential districts in beige. Standalone solar is permitted, of course, in the commercial and manufacturing districts, but it is not currently allowed in the beige areas. And as you can see from this map, that means a very large portion of the city's land area is off limits to community solar type, freestanding, primary use solar installations. With our proposal, renewable energy generation below 10,000 square feet would be permitted as of right in all commercial, manufacturing, and residential district types. Next slide. Our fourth proposal relates to onshore wind. Currently, along the waterfront, onshore wind turbines must comply with very strict height limits that you can see in this table at right, in most cases not permitted above 35 feet. However, some installations may need greater height flexibility. But as we learned recently in working with the FDNY and a proposal along at one of their training facilities along the Long Island Sound, there's no tool in the zoning resolution right now to allow modification or adjustment of those height limits. There are many places along the Long Island Sound, as well as New York Harbor and southern Staten Island, where the wind speeds are sufficient to make relatively small onshore wind installations viable and meaningful. To build on that, we're proposing to create a new authorization, a new tool that will allow the City Planning Commission to consider future applications for height and setback relief in order to facilitate onshore wind. I want to highlight that this proposal, City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality, will not itself change the height limits for onshore wind or permit it at any particular location. This proposal will simply create a new tool that will allow the Commission to consider proposals in the future. Next slide. The fifth proposal, and the last within the energy policy, relates to energy storage systems. As I mentioned before, essentially the glue that will be holding the grid of the future together. You can see illustrated here an example of a rooftop energy storage system already existing in the city at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. One of the issues for energy storage is that the zoning resolution currently does not have clear regulations governing energy storage. Energy storage wasn't on the map when we were doing Zone Green 10 years ago. However, the need for energy storage has become abundantly clear in the years since. Working with the Department of Buildings, we have been able to interpret that such uses could qualify as electric utility substations, a use that is currently listed in the zoning resolution, and thus must obtain a BSA, a Board of Standards and Appeals special permit, in order to locate in residence districts by virtue of the existing use categorization of electric utility substations. Our proposal is to create new uses that directly govern energy storage systems, codifying the interpretation that has existed to date and expanding on it for this crucially needed technology. The proposal would be to create new uses within the zoning resolution's use group 4 and use group 6 to accommodate grid supporting energy storage. The way that this would break down is that smaller installations with footprints smaller than 10,000 square feet would be considered use group 4 and would be permitted as of right in residence, commercial, and manufacturing districts. Larger installations with footprints larger than 10,000 square feet would still require the BSA review before locating in a residence district. However, these facilities would be allowed as of right in commercial and manufacturing districts. Accessory energy storage has been and will continue to be permitted as of right in residence, commercial, and manufacturing districts. I want to emphasize that energy storage systems, stationary energy storage systems that are integrated into buildings, are very, very different than some of the other batteries that we've been hearing about lately. Energy storage systems are designed in a custom way, almost unique to each installation by highly trained engineers and installed by highly trained teams of electricians. These energy storage systems are rigorously vetted and are required to undergo review at the Department of Buildings as well as at the fire department to ensure that they meet national standards as well as UL, Underwriters Laboratory certifications for the equipment. Next slide. I'm going to now go into some of the zoning changes that we are going to be proposing to support our buildings policy. Next slide. A larger context governing some of these zoning changes relates to the fact that New York City's buildings are our biggest source of carbon dioxide emissions, as we talked about at the beginning of this evening. Now, to decarbonize our building stock, virtually every single one of our city's million-plus existing buildings will need to be retrofit in some way, shape, or form. What that might look like in some cases is that boilers and furnaces will need to be replaced with all-electric systems like heat pumps. The envelopes, the exterior walls that surround our buildings will need their windows and walls to be improved, or in some cases, perhaps even replaced with new, highly efficient ones to keep all of that heated or cooled energy inside. There are also other local laws currently on the books that regulate this space. One of the important ones, Local Law 154, regulates new buildings by prohibiting them from installing fossil fuel equipment going forward. There's a phase-in, but after 2027, all new buildings in the city will be required to be fossil fuel-free. In addition, large buildings, so these are buildings larger than 25,000 square feet, that fail to cut their carbon dioxide emissions will begin to face steep fines as part of Local Law 97, one of the laws making up the New York City Climate Mobilization Act. Next slide. This is a huge effort, and it's going to look different for each building across the city. But in general, some of the concepts that I'll go over now apply to every building. And in particular, you could expect to need to, that rooftop insulation and solar panels would be appropriate on most building rooftops to help keep heat and cool inside of the building. We would be looking to install new energy efficient windows or exterior insulation panels. And importantly, within the building, we will need to retire oil or gas powered boilers or heaters and replace them with electrified equipment, such as installing mini split heat pumps. This is a big task, and it's going to take a long time. But to support that task, there are many resources out there. One of the key ones being New York City Accelerator. The Accelerator is a program of the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice and provides free expert guidance and trainings, and also connects home and building owners to service providers and financing opportunities. You can learn more at accelerator.nyc. Within this context, I'll talk about some of the zoning changes that we are working on to support these existing policy frameworks. Next slide. The first proposal, the 6th of the 17 this evening, regulates where electrified building equipment can locate. Currently, zoning regulates how much rooftop mechanical equipment is permitted above the zoning height limit. This takes the form of a coverage cap, a separate height limit, as well as a separate height limit on the rooftop mechanical equipment. The issue is that buildings which are retrofitting to all electric systems often need to replace boilers and heaters in their basements with heat pumps that are outdoors, typically on the roof. This is in order for the heat pump to be close to the atmosphere to be able to absorb or expel heat as necessary. In that shift from equipment buried deep inside of buildings to build that equipment located on top of buildings, installations can sometimes run into zoning limitations. To support the electrification of building systems across the city, we'll be proposing to provide greater flexibility for electric equipment, such as heat pumps, by rolling out zoning allowances that currently apply only in the floodplain, where folks have been working for years to locate or to relocate building systems out of their basements, where at risk of flooding, atop their buildings. Many of those same logics apply here. And so we will be proposing to roll out those flood zone relevant zoning allowances citywide. You can see some of the coverage caps and heights illustrated in this table here. Currently applying only in the floodplain, but with this proposal available to everyone citywide to support building electrification. Next slide. Our seventh proposal focuses on retrofitting the exterior of a building. One of the things we've heard is that there are a number of zoning technical glitches that have been preventing projects like the one illustrated here, where in this particular case, a mid-century office building with a thin 4-inch leaky facade is looking to retrofit by recladding, replacing the exterior wall with a new, thick, high-performance wall. Currently, zoning considers wall thickness as part of the floor area of the building. This floor area counts against your FAR, or the amount you are allowed to build. The issue then is that when trying to completely replace a thin facade, in this case 4 inches, with a thicker facade, in this case 11 inches, those additional 7 inches count as new floor area. If this building was built to its maximum FAR, as many buildings across the city typically are, or if it even predates zoning rules and may exceed the currently allowed FAR, adding FAR is simply not allowed. And this zoning glitch makes this facade replacement project impossible. We're anticipating seeing a lot more focus on retrofitting the exterior of a building, weatherproofing enclosures, and in some cases, even recladding a building entirely. To ensure that recladding is allowed, we're proposing to create a new allowance for additional wall thickness, provided that that new wall complies with the latest energy code requirements. Next slide. Our eighth proposal also relates to wall thickness and the performance of exterior walls, but in a very particular way. Whereas the prior proposal focused on ensuring that buildings can meet code, this proposal relates to incentivizing buildings to perform better than code. Currently, zoning allows a wall thickness floor area exemption. Some people refer to this as the zone green bonus for portions of walls that exceed energy code. This floor area exemption dates back to 2012 with our zone green zoning text amendment. The way that this works, as illustrated here, is that portions of your wall thickness can be excluded from floor area or your FAR, provided you meet high performance requirements. In particular, the first 8 inches of any exterior wall must count as floor area, just like they would in a normal building. However, beyond that 8-inch mark, the portion of the wall beyond 8 inches can be exempted, depending on your wall thickness, up to an additional 8 inches. In the case of a wall that's 16 inches thick, that's 50% of the wall thickness. And to qualify, the opaque portions, the non-glass portions of the wall, must outperform the energy code when it comes to heat loss by 20%, and the overall wall, including glass, which is notoriously leaky and transmits a lot of heat, must outperform the energy code by 10%. Now, there are a couple of issues with the way that this incentive works. The first is that the current exemption focuses only on heat transmission, U factor specifically from the energy code. This misses other key criteria of environmental performance of a wall, such as air leakage. The second is that the energy code's U factor, the U factor number prescribed for new construction, has been heavily revised since Zone Green was adopted 10 years ago. These days, it's very difficult to outperform the energy code's U factor, and it will be nearly impossible to outperform future U factors as the energy code is updated over the next several years. Administering this 8-inch rule is also very complex. It requires an analysis of each wall type at every story of the building to see how much wall is exempt and how much is not. This is very difficult for practitioners, and it's also difficult for the city to administer. And finally, one of the biggest issues here, especially considering that we have over 1 million existing buildings that need to be retrofit, is that it's impractical for existing buildings to take advantage of this Zone Green floor area exemption to perform better than code. With that in mind, we're proposing a number of improvements to this existing Zone Green floor wall thickness floor area exemption. Sorry, it's a mouthful. On the next slide. The first part of the proposal is to simplify the deduction, that 8-inch beyond 8-inch rule, into a flat 5% floor area exemption. Our analysis has shown that recent buildings that have taken the Zone Green floor area deduction generally deduct about 5% of their floor area. Simplifying this will make its use by practitioners much easier, its administration by the city much easier, and will also open up the opportunity to incentivize building aspects that go beyond merely the piece of the wall that we're looking at. What that means is that we're able to bifurcate the qualification criteria for these buildings to support, on one side, the retrofitting of existing buildings, and for new buildings to go even further. This proposal would be that existing buildings which retrofit to become fully electrified buildings, as many of them are incentivized to do by Local Law 97, these buildings would become eligible for the floor area exemption. While new buildings, which are already required separately to be fully electric by Local Law 154, these new buildings would be eligible for the exemption if they design to ultra low energy standards that aren't currently part of energy code. These are things that we typically think of when we look at passive house style standards. Low air leakage and very low energy use by the building. There are buildings in the city today that are already passive house style buildings, not many of them. I'm illustrating here the house at Cornell Tech, one of the few new buildings in New York City that do comply with these ultra low energy standards, and would be one of the things that we would be using this floor area exemption to incentivize into the next decade. Next slide. I'll now move on to some of the specific zoning changes we're anticipating as part of supporting our transportation goals. Next slide. When it comes to decarbonizing our vehicles, we have a big challenge ahead of us. Currently, there are 2 million private vehicles registered in New York City. And then less than 1% of those are currently zero emission vehicles, including electric vehicles. And we know that there are a lot of challenges to electrifying those 2 million vehicles: federal policy, state policy. And we know that one of the hurdles that each individual vehicle owner faces is finding a reliable place to park and charge their vehicle overnight. With that in place, it will become increasingly possible for city car owners to adopt electric vehicles. We're also anticipating that there will be a large increase in charging, given that in 2035, New York State has already set a goal that all vehicles sold in the state must be zero emission vehicles. That will include electric vehicles largely. Finally, when it comes to decarbonizing our transportation, I want to emphasize that we realize that a one-to-one transition of the city's 2 million internal combustion vehicles to 2 million electric vehicles is not the solution. What we really need to do as a city is to draw down our energy consumption at large. We also need to promote greater use of bicycles, e-micromobility, and mass transit to do this. Next slide. Carbonizing our vehicles, like the other goals, is a big goal, and city planning plays a part. I want to go over some of the way that different agencies regulate some of these considerations. The Department of Transportation regulates the right of way. So this includes the street, the sidewalk, and therefore curbside charging programs or on-street charging programs. City planning, through zoning, regulates the zoning lot. Therefore, we regulate off-street parking and off-street charging allowances. Finally, a third agency, our sister agency, the Department of Buildings, through its building code, contains requirements to include EV-ready spaces in certain new parking lots and garages. Together, these three agencies and their regulations govern the set of considerations around electric vehicle charging in the city. Next slide. To support the goal of decarbonizing our vehicles, our ninth proposal focuses on open to the public EV charging facilities. Imagine a gas station of the future, a freestanding facility where people can come and park their cars and charge them, similar to a gas station. Currently, since Zone Green, zoning considers these open to the public EV charging facilities as Use Group 7 commercial uses. These uses within Use Group 7 are allowed in some of our commercial districts as well as our manufacturing districts. But the issue is that these facilities aren't allowed in the other half of our commercial districts, which are also the commercial districts commonly mapped closest to where people live. This creates a problem when people are looking for dependable overnight charging locations close to home. Our proposal, therefore, would be to reclassify these facilities as Use Group 6 uses that are permitted in all commercial districts. The effect of this change would be to more than double the commercial land area across the city that would become available for the siting of EV charging facilities. With that, we hope that we'll see a much greater increase in dedicated EV charging facilities across the city. Next slide. Our 10th proposal governs parking, in particular in residence districts. Currently, zoning generally requires parking spaces serving uses such as retail stores or apartment buildings. These are called accessory parking spaces. They serve the homes or the businesses. Since Zone Green 10 years ago, accessory charging is permitted in all of these spaces. In addition, since before Zone Green, some of these spaces are permitted to be occupied by commercial car share program vehicles. The important thing to note here is that generally, accessory parking spaces cannot be used for uses other than the ones that they are dedicated to. Residential spaces that are accessory to a residential use must serve that residential use. However, with our car share program, we began to pilot the concept of devoting small amounts of these spaces to be dedicated to a commercial use, such as the location of a commercial car share vehicle in even a residential garage or lot. Now, the issue that we're looking to address here is that EV chargers installed in accessory spaces, while they are currently allowed by zoning, are not necessarily available to the public, and this is a zoning restriction. Therefore, our proposal would be to expand existing car share rules to allow property owners to designate up to 20% of their spaces, or 5 spaces, whichever is greater, to be dedicated, if they wish, for flexible public EV charger sharing, or car sharing, or any combination thereof. public parking facilities public parking facilities such as parking garages and public parking lots are already permitted to dedicate 100% of their spaces to public EV charging. Next slide. Building on that, in commercial and manufacturing districts, there are a number of commercial vehicle regulations that could also be improved. Currently, zoning regulates the use of parking spaces for one, car sharing services, such as the ones we were just talking about, but also more conventional car rental services. And finally, the storage of commercial vehicles. In particular, I'm talking about commercial trucks less than 20 feet, such as the box trucks that you might see servicing cable customers or fiber optic internet customers in a neighborhood. The issue is that these rules are varied, confusing, and limited, and they could be expanded to promote car rental and car sharing services, which are an alternative to personal car ownership and more likely to be electrified. In addition, we can provide more locations for the overnight parking of trucks so that they can also be charged in facilities that have EV charging infrastructure. Therefore, our proposal is in most commercial districts and in all manufacturing districts to allow up to 20% of accessory spaces in commercial and manufacturing districts to be occupied by car sharing vehicles, by car rental services, by public EV charging, like we discussed in the previous slide, or where the district regulations permit commercial vehicle storage as well, or any combination thereof, up to 20% of the spaces. In public parking lots and garages, of course, again, 100% of spaces would be available for EV charging, while 50% of the spaces in a public parking lot or public parking garage would be available for car share, car rental, and commercial vehicle storage. Taken together, we expect that these changes will greatly enhance the possibility for EV charging and the use of electric vehicles across the city. Next slide. Our 12th proposal relates to automated parking facilities, such as the one illustrated here on the slide. Currently, in the Manhattan core, zoning grants special allowances to automated parking facilities that are tailored to the unique operational needs of systems which automatically deposit and retrieve vehicles using automated technology. These are facilities that do not allow humans to enter. The car is dropped off on a tray, it's picked up by a mechanized system, and is delivered into the automated facility. For example, when it comes to zoning tailoring here, the minimum space requirements for a parking space are reduced for these types of facilities to reflect the unique tray and rack system that is used to store the vehicles. The issue is that these allowances don't currently apply outside of the Manhattan core, greatly limiting the feasibility of such facilities anywhere in the city except for Manhattan. To support the rollout of this technology across the city, which features less embodied carbon in the form of building materials and also reduces vehicle idling times and can support electrification, we propose to allow the zoning regulations tailored to automated parking facilities to be expanded citywide. Next slide. Our 13th proposal relates to bicycle storage. Currently, zoning provides use regulations for automobile parking as well as automobile charging. The issue is that zoning doesn't provide any similar regulations for bicycles and other forms of e-micromobility. This creates regulatory uncertainty around where and how these types of uses would be permitted. To support the growth of bike usage and biking infrastructure, including secure off-street bike storage, we propose a new commercial use for public bicycle and e-micromobility parking. In addition, our proposal would include new rules that also provide for secure outdoor bike storage lockers to be permitted obstructions in zoning required yards and open spaces. Taken together, we expect that these rules would facilitate greater usage of bicycling and promote greater infrastructure to support bicyclists. Next slide. Next, I'll talk about the proposals related to supporting our goals around decarbonizing solid waste and stormwater. Next slide. When it comes to decarbonizing our waste stream, only 4% of the city's greenhouse gas footprint is accounted for by waste. However, there are some clear steps that we can take to support the decarbonization of our waste stream. These include reducing stormwater runoff, because this reduces the need for energy-intensive stormwater treatment, which has a large carbon footprint. Similarly, by diverting organic material from the waste stream, we can reduce the size of our solid waste stream by up to 45%, greatly reducing all of the energy and related carbon dioxide emissions associated with administering such a large waste stream. And finally, by supporting local food systems, we can also play a role in reducing the carbon dioxide emissions associated with the food we eat in our neighborhoods. Next slide. The 14th proposal relates to expanding the use of permeable paving. Currently, zoning is supposed to allow any paving area in the city to be paved instead of with asphalt with permeable paving. Permeable paving is a genre of paving material that allows for stormwater to infiltrate back into the ground immediately where it falls. However, the issue here is that the text in the zoning resolution, as drafted, seems to indicate that the Department of Buildings must investigate each proposed installation to deem it appropriate. What we've heard in our outreach to date is that the ambiguity about how to do this has disincentivized many from using or specifying permeable paving systems in the city. Our proposal, therefore, is to revise this language in order to make it clear that permeable paving is always allowed in New York City, period. And our hope is that this will result in a much greater proportion of the city that is paved in permeable paving going forward. Next slide. Our 15th proposal relates to on-street tree infrastructure. Currently, zoning requires street trees to be installed alongside new developments as well as enlargements. However, as drafted, the zoning text precludes the use of newer, more innovative prototypes that our sister agencies at DOT and DEP have been developing, such as connected tree beds and rain gardens. Our proposal is to update our zoning rules when it comes to the requirements to plant street trees, to add flexibility to those street tree requirements, to allow for building and homeowners to elect to use connected tree beds, as well as substitute one required street tree with a DEP compliant rain garden. Together, these changes will promote greater use of stormwater retention and reduce the amount of stormwater that needs to be treated across the city. Next slide. Our 16th proposal pertains to regulations for composting and recycling. Believe it or not, currently, our zoning resolution doesn't mention the words composting or recycling at all. The issue is that this creates confusion about where composting and recycling are allowed to occur. The Department of Sanitation's only compost facility is currently located in a heavy manufacturing district on Staten Island, which is where that belongs. However, our proposal is to clarify these uses going forward so that small-scale composting and recycling can be considered accessory, that neighborhood-focused compost and recycling facilities can locate in commercial storefronts, and that large-scale facilities are clearly required to remain in heavy manufacturing districts. Next slide. And finally, our 17th proposal relates to rooftop food production. Currently, zoning allows rooftop greenhouses to be added atop non-residential buildings, even beyond maximum FAR and maximum height limits. The issue is that even though there are a few straightforward requirements in order to be able to pursue this zoning allowance, all applicants are required to obtain a CPC certification, a certification from the chair of the City Planning Commission, that they follow the rules. This increases the cost of the process and we believe discourages projects. To date, since Zone Green introduced this allowance, only 2 locations across the city have taken advantage of it, pictured here. To promote more rooftop greenhouses across the city in non-residential contexts, our proposal is to remove the rooftop certification to enable non-residential rooftop greenhouses on an as-of-right basis. These proposals would still be evaluated by DOB at the time of building permit, and we believe that the rules that are outlined currently in the certification can easily be incorporated into that process. With this change, we hope that more building and homeowners will take advantage of the allowance to add a rooftop greenhouse, and that we will see greater uptake of food production in our city. Next slide. To summarize, we believe that these 17 proposals will greatly support the 4 goals set out at the beginning of the presentation. They will provide much needed updates to our zoning resolution to support the urgent work that we face ahead of us. Next slide. Again, this is just the beginning of a public review process. In April, we're looking forward to beginning the formal beginning of this review process and presenting this material to the broad public through the public review process. If anyone has any questions about, if anyone has any questions, concerns, or wants to be signed up for email alerts on this project going forward, we encourage you to reach out to us at City Planning at carbonneutrality@planning.nyc.gov. I also want to let you all know that when we begin public review of this process, the draft zoning text amendment will be transmitted to all of our community boards across the city, but it will also be posted publicly online at our website, nyc.gov/DCP, for everyone to review. We're looking forward to hearing from you. And with that, next slide. We'll begin the open discussion portion of the evening. So thank you all for your patience. I know zoning can sometimes be a dense topic, and I appreciate your interest and your patience, and looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
One moment before we begin the Q&A. Production, would you please check to see if the Spanish interpreters are both in the channels?
They are both in place.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Nihilus, for all those incredible details of this important proposal. Thank you for taking the time. So just want to remind everyone, we have multiple ways that you can ask your question. We have received some questions in the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen. If you're most comfortable submitting questions in writing, please do that. Otherwise, if you would like to raise your hand, we will unmic you and you'll be able to ask your question live. And we'll take them in the order that we receive them. I don't see any hands raised at the moment, so I am going to go to the Q&A chat right now to read off some of the questions that are answered there. To start, we have a question from Jim Wright. Would energy storage systems be included or excluded from building FAR requirements? Can they be freestanding, i.e. not within or on a building? The technical question, I'm not sure, Nihilus, I believe you may be taking it, or maybe Frank?
Yeah, I could take it. It's a great question. And to be clear, we're still working on the proposal. This is early on in the process still. But when it comes to accessory energy storage, generally accessory energy storage would be exempt from floor area like any of the other types of mechanical spaces that support a building. So that's like HVAC and electrical rooms in a typical, for example, office building. As a primary use, generally we see energy storage installed outdoors where it would not count as floor area. And generally we think that's how that would work in the future. We are still looking into certain instances where perhaps it would count as floor area given the particular installation particulars. And you had asked if they can be freestanding or not within or on a building, and that is true. In fact, energy storage can be a freestanding use as a primary use currently, and as well as in our proposal. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Nihilus. I do see one hand raised, but I'm going to do one more question from the Q&A chat. And then we'll go to the one question live and then back to the Q&A chat. So again, question from Jim. Any consideration of protecting solar access to individual buildings? Right, Nihilus.
That's something that we are looking into. And in general, our hope is that we'll create as of right rules that will allow for solar to be installed easily and freely across the city without any sort of difficult processes or studies to determine if it's appropriate at a particular rooftop. Our goal here is really to get all of our city's rooftops covered with solar as quickly as possible. The city has a 1,000 megawatt solar goal by 2030. So that's a gigawatt of solar. And to date, with all the solar that's ever been installed in New York City, we are maybe a third of the way there at 300 megawatts or so. That means over the next 8 years, we have to cover vast amounts of our city's rooftops with solar in order to meet that goal. So that is one of the key things on our mind when it comes to developing a solar proposal. Thank you for the question.
So I'm going to go to our attendee who's raised their hand. I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Appreciate if you correct me. Suin Chang.
Suwen is being promoted.
Hi. So if you're starting the ULERT process in April, I assume at that time you would be conducting a public scoping session for the environmental assessment for these text amendments. Is that correct?
That's a great question. Thank you. We are currently undertaking an environmental assessment as part of this project. That is not an assessment that will lead to an environmental impact statement, and therefore we will not be having a scoping hearing. There won't be any necessary, given the fact that the changes that we're anticipating as part of this project fall below the thresholds required for an environmental impact statement.
How do we know that?
That is part of the assessment that we've been doing as we've been developing the policy proposal. And we have intentionally not undertaken policies that would require a study of an impact.
Okay, could we see that? Is it possible for us to get a copy of that assessment that you've done to date?
Absolutely. When the zoning text is released as part of the referral on April 24th, it will include our EAS with it.
I mean, okay, so you're not going to release it before then, because that means that we really don't have a chance to look at it. And I know you've said that you want to make that information as public as possible or ahead of time. Because in particular, I'm thinking that some of these height limits for battery storage, which is something that has not been common until now, but could become common. You know, it's up to 3 feet tall on some roofs. And then what's the cumulative impact of all of the text amendments that you've undertaken over the years with Fresh, in some cases, the zoning for transit, and this? You know, we could be seeing height increases of 50 to 75% over what you might expect even in a contextual district. And I do think that one of the things that we've been seeing at our community board over and over again is people coming to us and saying, why is that building on my block so tall? I thought they could only go up to 6 stories. Why is it 8 stories? In this case, we could be looking at buildings that would go from 8 to 12 or 8 to 15 on the back of some of these height increases. And have you considered the cumulative impact of all of these things?
Absolutely.
And-
Yeah. Oops. Thank you very much for raising that. I'm happy to say that no part of this proposal will lead to height increases like 50% or 75% like you're talking about. The only part of our proposal that's related to heights is related to the height of rooftop solar installations. Currently, in many districts across the city, those solar installations, when they exceed the zoning height limit, are limited to 15 feet. And that is something that we intend to keep in those districts in order to accommodate FDNY clear heights. In the lower density districts, where we currently limit rooftop solar to 6 feet, we are proposing to increase that also to 15 feet to accommodate
Right,
that
but
FDNY
since you're
requirement.
considering increasing the coverage limit for the rooftops, that is going to impact whether or not people are actually doing this, as well as whether you're allowing grid scale as of right in residential districts. Right now, you can go up to 10,000 square feet. That means on a lot of smaller houses, the entire roof could be covered with a 33-foot tall installation, not just, one little box or something like that.
I'm not sure where 33 feet is coming from. The solar would be capped at 15 feet.
No, I'm not
on a
talking
flat
about
roof.
solar. I'm talking about the battery storage and, other similar mechanical equipment, which is solid, unlike the solar. Right. And I mean, the second adjacent question to that is have you considered whether it might be appropriate in some cases to simply rezone some areas that are residential, but that you consider appropriate for a grid scale installation to commercial? Like, for example, we have a large hospital campus that is in R5 zoning, but since all of the buildings are commercial, have you ever considered whether in those kinds of situations you could rather than simply permitting grid scale installations as a right in all residential districts, whether it might be better to just rezone those particular areas for an appropriate commercial zone that would allow it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And a hospital is a great example of the type of community facility use that since zoning was created has been allowed as a community facility use, a non-residential use in residence districts. Community facility uses are widespread in residence districts. And that is precisely one of the reasons why we believe that creating an allowance for the smaller grid supporting renewable energy generation uses in residence districts is appropriate, particularly for those types of community facility uses. So thank you very much for the question.
Thank you. Let's move to Appletide.
Okay, can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. My question is about having solar energy battery storage. And I was wondering if that is being allowed on this new push to expand the use of solar energy. I have 24 solar panels on the roof of my 2-family brownstone, and I've been asking for a battery for years. And I'm being told that it hasn't been approved in the city yet by the fire department.
Yeah, it's a great question. And that is a great example of some of the zoning issues that people have faced trying to install small batteries to support things like a residentially scaled solar panel installation. We've worked really closely with the FDNY for several years now on this topic. FDNY is increasingly permitting under fire code small energy storage installations like the one you're describing. And that's where zoning comes into play and generally does not allow those types of installations. A small energy storage system like located in a side yard or in a rear yard, zoning does not allow that. So we are looking to loosen that up so that folks like yourself can place an energy storage system to support your solar installation that you already have, which is excellent, and help reduce your energy costs every day. So thank you for the question.
Thank you. One last closing. What position will Con Ed have to take to continue to provide its services?
Yeah, we are working very closely with Con Ed to make sure that the zoning changes that we are making are aligned with their needs and aren't things that they aren't expecting, are directly supporting them. So going forward, the larger policies that I talked about in the presentation include the need to have a lot more distributed energy resources across the city. That includes in homes like yours, and Con Ed is aligned on that goal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to go to 2 questions in the chat, and then I'll come back to the 3 hands that are raised: Steve, Billy, and Nicole. We have a question related to parking minimums. Any consideration of eliminating minimum parking requirements citywide? This is again from Jen.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And in fact, many other cities that we've studied, when they are tackling the subject of decarbonization, one of the first things they look at is eliminating parking minimums. Parking minimums are well known to promote private vehicle usage and are one of the impediments to reducing our energy goals and becoming a decarbonized city. We are absolutely looking at parking minimums, but given the complexity and the need to address that change robustly, we aren't pursuing it as part of this particular proposal. That's an example of one of the things, to go back to an earlier question, that we aren't undertaking as part of this proposal, precisely because of the robustness of that study that would be required. We are currently doing research as a department on supporting parking changes as part of the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity text amendment, which will be coming the info session. Similar to this presentation, the info session for that project will come later this year. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Nihilus. Another question around street trees. Are street trees required in manufacturing districts? If not, then why not require them to reduce TDI impacts?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. So street trees are required with some exemptions for certain heavy, true industrial uses, manufacturing uses, and given their possible conflict with the street tree requirement. So where those street trees aren't not required because of those industrial uses, but still within a manufacturing district. So for example, a non-heavy industrial use as a permitted use in a manufacturing district, all of the things that I talked about will apply to those street tree installations as well. Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Nihilus. The next couple of questions are actually people who have also raised their hands. So I will go to back to our live questions. The next in line is Steve Chesler.
Hi, oops.
Hi, Steve.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, there was a bit of a glitch there. Yeah, thank you, and thank you very much for the presentation. Yeah, related to the battery storage systems, realize how important they are in this broad strategy, but I'm on community board one in Brooklyn, and we're we considered a special permit application for installing a large-scale battery storage system on top of a residential loft building. And in our conversations with FDNY around safety, they basically conveyed to us that they do not have experience in extinguishing fires from battery storage cells at a scale beyond like small mobile, e-bike type of vehicles. So there's a concern in, I guess, a movement to free property owners to be able to install these systems on their buildings, but there is a major concern around safety and ability of the fire department to extinguish a fire from this type of system, because I understand it involves in a tremendous amount of water and the potential volatility of the just the makeup of these cells. So I'm just wondering if there's really been a deep enough consideration of this the safety concern. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and it's a great point. I'll start by emphasizing that safety is one of the key concerns we have as well, while also realizing the crucial role that energy storage is going to play in our city. We have been working with, I can reassure you, we've been working very closely with FDNY for years, and in particular on this proposal, and we'll continue to do so. And I just, when it comes to, so I'm familiar with the particular proposal that you're discussing, and I understand that there are a lot of unique sort of idiosyncrasies to that particular application that were complicated. But I just want to say that, absolutely, the proposal that we put forth will be something that we've worked very closely with FDNY on, and will be something that they support. I would also emphasize that FDNY does take a role in reviewing energy storage systems across the city. So anything above 250 kilowatts, that would include the 315, the application that you're speaking about. Those all require FDNY and DOB review, regardless of the land use framework. And to be clear, currently in commercial districts, in manufacturing districts, recognizing that commercial districts also allow residential buildings in them, the current zoning framework allows energy storage without a BSA special permit. So those installations require DOB and FDNY review for safety. And really, our proposal is to align, because our zoning text doesn't currently regulate energy storage specifically. We're borrowing an old electric utility substation use allowance to create clear rules that are aligned across residential, commercial, and manufacturing districts for the technology. So hopefully that's helpful. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you, Niles. I'd definitely like to emphasize that we always work very closely with our sister agencies on particularly proposals like this that we'll be submitting for public review. Want to go to our next hand. It's Nicholas. Promote. Then we'll go to Tammy, and then I'll go back to questions that have been submitted in the chat.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. I wanted to ask one question I put in the chat, but I wanted to know what is the use of hydrogen power generating considered part of the city of Yes? And number two, along with the charging station, will the city be installing hydrogen filling station? Because that's also one of the solutions to decarbonizing.
Absolutely. I've personally been very interested in following developments in hydrogen fuels for vehicles, which I think is what you're speaking about. Currently, we don't really have a big hydrogen footprint in the city. And we believe that our zoning framework right now allows for hydrogen fueling. We have a current use listing for gas stations, auto service stations, which allows for facilities that provide motor fuels for vehicles. And that could be gasoline, that could be hydrogen fuel. So we believe that zoning framework that exists today does not need to be changed and is appropriate for for future experiments with hydrogen, which of course will require proceeding very carefully and with a number of layers of regulation from the federal government, the state, and at the city level, in particular from our construction and fire codes. So thank you for the question. I personally am very interested to see how that space develops over the coming years.
Okay, so next is Tammy, and then I will go back to questions from the chat.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, I have to try and find it. I also sent an email for these questions. Can you talk about how DCP is looking at zoning to support rooftop gardens in this program, if it will be included at all?
Hi, Tammy. Sure. Yeah. So we are working within a set of assumptions that includes the existing framework of Local Law 92 and Local Law 94, which have sustainable roofing zone requirements, which can be satisfied on different rooftops in different ways. That includes solar. In some cases, that includes blue roofs and green roofs. So that is sort of built into our working assumption here, that those local laws are regulating the rooftops, and we are creating greater zoning flexibility for building owners to figure out the right mix for their particular building.
As a follow-up to that, in the much more dense urban areas or historic zones, for example, it is near impossible to do bioswales, rain gardens, and additional street trees due to the infrastructure needs and the current landscape. So how can DCP include in this plan above grade planters as an alternative for bioswales and rain gardens in those type of districts? And will it be included in this program?
I think that's an excellent point. Certainly something that we can take back. I totally see where you're coming from. And many of the prototypes that we're looking to update zoning to recognize are prototypes that already have been set forth by DOT and DEP. I'm confident that there are prototypes that are above grade as well. And something that we've been sensitive to in our research so far about rain gardens in particular are the wide and varied constraints that building owners run into when they're trying to install street trees. So that's something that we're trying to recognize. So I appreciate that. Appreciate you bringing that up, and that's definitely something that we'll include as we continue to research this and bring it closer to referral.
I'm sincerely hoping that you are able to show opportunities of that when you come for referral to the community boards and for public envisioning, and it does not stay as a, yes, we're working on it, no offense intended.
Fair enough. Thank you, Tammy. And I did receive your email. You were next in line, so we'll mark those as that we've been able to answer them, and feel free to email us other questions if you have. I'm going to go back to the chat. We have a question, Nihilus, about property incentives from Teresa. Will there be incentives for property owners of older buildings to upgrade their buildings?
Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. Yeah, great question. And there are a number of, I kind of need to break the answer down into two different scales, right? So we have buildings that are larger than 25,000 square feet, and those are buildings governed by Local Law 97. And there is a very specific set of policies applying to those buildings, in particular requiring them through law and applying fines where carbon emissions are not reduced. Below 25,000 square feet, so smaller buildings across the city, there are currently opportunities that the accelerator can connect folks with who are looking to make retrofits to their building to support decarbonization. And there are a lot more coming. So at the state and federal level, there has been a lot of money earmarked for retrofitting work, particularly in New York City. And those programs are currently being built. And that's something that we're tracking really closely at New York City Planning. So looking forward to sharing more information about those programs as they continue to get built. Thank you very much for the question.
So the next question is geared towards the wall thickness. It comes from Aaron, and for the wall thickness, could a developer build higher if they use thicker wall under the new zoning change? How do you avoid the issue with mechanical voids? Could this grant additional FAR to developers? Nihilus or other people from the team want to jump in on this too?
Yeah, others are welcome to join in. So one of the things that we've seen when it comes to the existing system is that there are sort of incentives to create walls that are thicker than necessary to hit that 16-inch goalpost that I was talking about, where you max out the incentive. That's certainly something we don't want to see. We don't want to see people building bigger walls than necessary in order to get that floor area deducted, which they can then in turn, depending on the square footage involved, locate elsewhere. So one of the things that we're looking to change here is that incentive to make bigger walls than you need to by creating a simple flat system that applies to the whole building and does not incentivize, sort of funny business, I guess you could say, with wall thickness. The requirements to get that floor area are pretty strict. So for an existing building, you will have to become a fully electrified building. That is 100% our goal as a city, is to get electrified buildings. And then at the, for new buildings, excuse me, I'm in the office and our lights are flashing, I guess because it's late. For new buildings, we are going to be requiring a set of ultra low energy usage criteria, which are fairly strict. So that's a high bar in order to achieve that and get that floor area deducted going forward. Thank you very much for the question. It's an excellent one, and certainly something we've been aware of and tracking as part of our research.
Now this next question is around state and city coordination from Kendall. I think the question's a little bit cut off, so let me just. Kendall's curious about integration of various state and city initiatives for these proposals. Is there a document that compares the CLCPA, which I'm not positive that I know what that stands for? If you do, Nihilus, if you can describe it, or Kendall, if you could write more.
Sure, yeah, I can do that.
As to organics, when it comes to other agencies that are listed here, which is the environmental protection, sanitation, parks, just launched an 18 to 24-month comprehensive plan effort that likely will include zoning recommendations. And the city's interest in waste containerization will likely yield access to curb consideration around the city. How are all of those and more being considered and coordinated? Just really about like what's the coordination that's happening across state and city?
Sure. Yeah. No, it's a great question. Thank you, Kendall. And absolutely, we are endeavoring to coordinate this with our city and state partners to the absolute maximum possible. We have worked closely with the state, and in particular with NYSERDA, the state agency that is involved in energy policy, to ensure that what we're proposing is aligned with the broad brushstrokes of what's the CLCPA is going to the state. So the CLCPA is the state climate legislation that promotes things like decarbonization across the state. Is very similar in some ways to New York City's own version, the Climate Mobilization Act. And our zoning proposals are absolutely designed to coordinate with and support the state CLCPA. When it comes to organics, we have talked with DEP, sanitation, parks, DCAS, MOCEJ. We speak with MOCEJ on a very regular basis. So I'm happy to say that organics proposal is something that they're aware of. And then when it comes to waste containerization, that is definitely a big topic that we've been tracking closely. It is something that is still going to be studied for a fair bit of time still, and is not ready for inclusion in this project. And when the recommendations for containerization are ready, we'll be happy to conduct a planning study to incorporate them into zoning as appropriate. So thank you for the question, and thank you for the opportunity to assure everyone that we are absolutely working to harmonize this proposal with our state and city partners.
Thank you, Nihilus, and thank you for clarifying acronyms for me. I'm going to go back to the raised hands function, particularly because Billy, your question is next in the chat, so I wanted to make sure that you have an opportunity to ask it live. Can we promote Billy? Hello. To unmic.
Okay. Hello?
Hi, how are you?
Hi. Because my question, I guess, thank you, first of all, for great presentation and so much detail and so many great initiatives. But I guess my question is, one, how can you consider all this without including parks in every neighborhood? Just nature, parks, trees are one of the best sequesters of carbon and give free, oxygen in the air. And just for mental health and quality of life, it's just, I don't see how it can ever be excluded from any of these zoning things. But also, I guess my paranoid for the city of Yes is that, Mayor Adams also just upzoned. I'm on the Lower East Side, all for higher buildings everywhere. And much of this been talking about density, and the city of Yes, part of it seems to be the city of Yes for developers. And these initiatives are great, but not if it means, because the housing this is all lumped in with housing and greening and carbon neutrality, which are all great. But it seems to me that one of the best approaches would be to retrofit the old buildings, and there's empty office buildings. So I don't know how much, my question really was, like, how much is this city of Yes to the developers? And this is sort of like the icing on the cake that they have. It's a more political question, I guess, than, but also I don't see how you cannot include like street trees and compared to parks, and we're losing so many parks and so many mature trees that won't come back for our lifetime. And they're so important for the city health of people and the city itself.
Thank you so much. And it's a great question. And a lot of those things are front of mind for myself. One of the reasons that planning for parks is something, I guess I would start by saying, that's built into our planning work, period. And so the City of Yes for Carbon Neutrality is really focused on supporting retrofitting work. So that's another thing that you brought up is adaptive reuse. And I think that that's core to this proposal, is supporting adaptive reuse, supporting the continued use of our existing buildings, helping those existing buildings retrofit and come into the 21st century and continue to provide for our needs without emitting carbon dioxide emissions going into the future. So because of those are sort of specific technical things that we don't often get a chance to include in our planning work, that those retrofitting considerations about adding heat pumps and solar panels and things like that across the city. That's something that we're taking the unique opportunity with this particular proposal to do.
So, I mean, how tied in is this to all the upzoning that has just occurred across the city, pretty much?
This is a freestanding proposal, and it's really focused on supporting decarbonization and retrofitting work across our city's existing buildings.
Okay, thank you. I just want to look at the queue. Ethel, if you can give me 2 seconds, because we're able, you have asked a question already. I'm just going to go to a couple more into the chat, and then I'll come right back to you. There's a question, Nihilus, about new buildings that Marilyn had asked. Are these new apartment buildings meeting requirements for the walls and windows?
Yes. So this is not a city planning thing. This is not a zoning thing, but the energy code has been getting updated very rigorously. And that is something that happens both at the state level, because the state sets the state guidelines for all cities within the state. And then it happens at the city level where we incorporate changes into our own local energy code. So that has been happening at a very fast clip. Every 3 years, the energy code has been updated and a stretch code gets developed at the state level, which goes beyond. And then that stretch code is adopted by the city as our main energy code. So today, to build a brand new building, the baseline energy code requirements are extremely strict. And that has been one of the things that we've found with that zone green wall area incentive, has been causing that incentive not to work very well, because outperforming in that particular way, heat transmission in that particular technical case, has been difficult to do because our energy code has gotten so good. So as we go into the future, when we do see new construction in the city, that new construction is required by the state and the city through our energy code to be highly efficient. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. This question is based on the building code revisions. This is Kendall again about implications for the building code revisions. Another process that's underway. Will any of the zoning proposals also have building implications? I'm sorry, that's not as clear, but
yeah, I suppose if Kendall's on the call and maybe we could come back around and get more detail, but I would just kind of reiterate what I just described, which is that there are building code revisions that have been happening alongside our zoning rules. That's been happening as directed by the state and in partnership with our sister agency, the Department of Buildings, and the energy code has been updated in particular as part of the building code, the construction codes. And we anticipate that those codes will continue to be updated into the future to become even more stringent as we move into our fossil fuel-free future. We have been working very closely with DOB, the Department of Buildings, who administers the building code. And then we also have been working very closely with NYSERDA at the state level, who has been developing the stretch codes that stretch in those intervening periods and push us to have even higher energy performance. Thank you for the question.
okay. I'm going to go back to Ethel. Back to raised hands.
Thank you for the opportunity to ask about the battery storage in a little bit more detail. Are you aware of other types of storage batteries other than lithium ion that would be helpful for nighttime usage for solar energy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not a chemist or an engineer, but I am a little bit familiar with the various chemistries that are out there for batteries. And in particular, we've been really heartened to see developments even within lithium ion and new forms of lithium ion, like lithium iron phosphate, which are more suitable for building oriented energy storage. There are other chemistries out there which are less commonplace. That includes the lead acid batteries that you'd see in a conventional vehicle to help spark ignition. Those are or in a boat. Those types of batteries are also sometimes used at the building scale. There's also a lot of development, partly because of all the innovation in the vehicular sector, in new types of batteries, and we're following that closely. Very interested to see how that plays out in the coming years. Thank you for the question.
We'll go to Alicia Boyd next. Hi, Alicia, can you hear us?
Yes. I wanted to find out, when you go into the public review process of this, are you going to be conducting in-person hearings, especially in communities of color, because we have a disproportionate amount of people who are unable to, who don't even have internet access, don't have emails, don't have access to Zoom, and this has all been documented. These proposals that you are considering, text amendment proposals, are supposed to go to every corner of New York City. And I wanted to find out if you were going to be addressing the fact that there's a large amount of people who are unable to participate when you restrict the process to a Zoom meeting. So, and the second question is, I know that you're supposed to have available the actual text amendments at the beginning of the public review process. I want to find out, how will the community be able to access those text amendments? Are you just sending them to community boards? Will you have it on your website? Will somebody have to contact DCP to get it? Or will we have to do FOIL, Freedom of Information requests, which can take 4 months to get that? So I wanted to ask those two very important questions.
Thank you so much. And absolutely, those are important questions. So thank you for asking them. We absolutely will be having in-person hearings and meetings going forward in the public review process. This is really, this particular info session is sort of a preview of what will be in the public review process, an attempt to get information out even earlier than as early as possible. April 24th is going to be the official start of the public review process. And that text amendment, that the actual zoning text, will be transmitted to all of the community boards, but it will also be posted conspicuously. I will make sure of it on our city planning website, so that anyone in the public could review it themselves. We also always make provisions here at city planning for folks who don't have the internet to call up, and we can make provisions for people who need alternative arrangements. Happy to support that. So happy to say that the zoning text, April 24th onwards, we are still working on it, but it will be online, publicly accessible, available to everyone. And we will be going out into the communities in person. Absolutely. I also look forward in July to an in-person hearing here at City Planning on this proposal. So we will definitely be in person. Thank you for asking that.
We'll also be advertising through social media, through Twitter, ways to make sure that people are aware that the zoning text is out. If there's other ways that we should be connecting with people and working with our advocacy groups to try to promote it. We'll also, please let us know if there's other ways. You can email us at carbon neutrality. Well, I don't have the actual, we'll put the email address back up as well.
Yeah, carbon neutrality at planning.nyc.gov.
Thank you. Just want to misrepresent it. I just want to do a time check that it is 9 o'clock. We have.
I just wanted to ask. I just wanted to ask one more question. Will the community at this point be able to submit suggestions of changes in the current proposals? And are you accepting that currently, or are you waiting for the public review process to begin in order to accept the positions of community groups, local community groups and residents?
Yep, that's a great question. And that's absolutely why we're doing this, is we want to share as much as we can, as soon as we can, and get meaningful input. So we have, if we could get the email address back up, I think it's the slide prior to this one, just for everyone's reference, please do reach out to us at that email address. We're looking forward to hearing from you. We will be posting this exact slide deck on our website. You can also watch the video recording of this session or share that with others and review it and share your thoughts with us at the email address there. Thanks very much for that important question.
We have a couple more questions just in the chat. This is again about, Steve, I just want to make sure, that I've read your question. It may have been answered in the last conversation. Will the city of Yes proposed zoning tax changes come through the community boards as one large text amendment or as several amendments and be reviewed at the same time? The scope is enormous. I'm not sure if you're referring to the other text amendments that are part of the city of Yes, the economic opportunity and the housing opportunity. Those will be separate referrals to the commission. So those will not be attached to this carbon neutrality one. This one is looking at the presentation of information that you received today.
Thank you for that, Lara, and absolutely. When it comes to carbon neutrality, all 17 of the things that I talked about will be a single text amendment. So all the stuff covered today will be part of a single package, which will be part of the review that will happen for City of Yes for carbon neutrality. And then absolutely to echo Lara, economic opportunity and housing opportunity projects will follow thereafter.
We have one more question from Teresa. This is related to parking again. With the new zoning, it severely reduces the number of parking spots required. Is that a backward approach? New developments need more parking and EV charging. Our post office in Crown Heights needs parking. Our EV charging needs EV charging, as do all our current residents. We need cheap solar. Our apartment dwellers need their electricity bills reduced, and will the solar roofs share and reduce costs for local residents? So it's the combination of parking and the ability to lower the cost of electric bills.
Yeah, it's a great question. Great set of observations. I totally agree. We need more EV charging infrastructure. That includes more off-street EV charging infrastructure. There are a lot of parking spaces out there, and part of this proposal is to make sure that all the parking spaces that are out there can be EV charging spaces, and that portions of them can even become public EV charging spaces. When new parking is created, that should be EV compatible parking as well. Absolutely. When it comes to all of the distributed energy resources that we've been talking about tonight, that includes solar rooftops. That's absolutely designed to support meeting our climate goals, weaning our energy production off of fossil fuels, and getting us to a point where we have clean, healthy, renewable, and cheap energy. Absolutely. Our hope is that more zoning flexibility will lead to more distributed energy, more solar and storage at every building across the city. And as a consequence, people living in those buildings will see their energy costs go down and benefit in the savings from reduced time of demand charges and things like that. So really looking forward to supporting cleaner and cheaper energy through this proposal. Thanks for bringing those points up.
Thank you, Niles. Thank you so much for answering all of these questions. I'm looking through, and it looks like we've answered the questions in the chat. I don't see any hands raised. So I think we're going to close out this session. I want to thank you again for you joining us this evening. And to remind you that this proposal, this slide deck will be on our website. We will make sure it is available to all community boards and they're aware of it. And we will also be reaching out with more information as we get closer to the April 24th referral date. Please stay in touch with us through our website, carbonneutrality@planning.nyc.gov. And please look at our social media and our website for more information on the upcoming referral date on April 24th. Thank you again for all coming, and we will have another session that will be repeating tonight's presentation next Tuesday, the 28th, at 7 p.m. again. You can join. It'll be the same presentation. If you have more questions, please feel free to join us for that. Thank you all. Thank you, Nihilus, and thank you everybody for attending.
Thank
you.
you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.